this came from the Sunday Times. Tories to hold under 100 seats to Labour's 468, says exclusive poll. And this is one of these MRP polls, which I'm sure you know, Toby, is a multi-level regression and post-stratification poll. And that basically, my layman's understanding is, instead of trying to find a sort of, whatever you are, a 60-year-old man from West London with X amount of kids, because that's quite hard to find that one person. It finds each individual characteristic, like you're a man, you're from West London, your age. It puts them all together in a kind of probability map and then does that for a single constituency, and you get a much more accurate picture. And even Dominic Cummings has said these are very accurate. And this predicts Tories get 98 seats. So, and all the Tories are talking about, let's just survive. It's not about winning anymore. It's about how many seats can we save. There was also some revelations about Rishi, that he gets hangry, which I'm feeling a bit today, actually, and I'm in pain. So I totally relate, Rishi, but he gets hangry and because he's fasting all the time. They also say he triangulates decisions far too much. He asks far too many people. It takes him too long to make a decision. And so he's too nice in a way. And he doesn't have that killer instinct, I think, which I think we've noticed. And so he can't really do the job. And and people say he doesn't know who his voters are. Well, no one at the moment. But what do you think to this, Toby? And people have said it could get even worse than this, which I can talk about in a minute. But first, did you see this piece?
I did, and it did include some pretty damning quotes from people who didn't want to be named, like a ministerial advisor, a second advisor. But yeah, one of them said it takes an age for him to make a decision because he triangulates everything. He doesn't have that instinctive feel and say, that's the right answer, we're going to do that even if we piss off a group of people. Instead, he looks at all the detail and thinks, oh, they've got a point and they've got a point. Maybe there's some compromise position in the middle. And he comes to that decision in months, not weeks. And when you arrive, nobody's happy and everyone ends up pissed off. There was another comment. It's worse than it was under Theresa May. Cabinet committees, other than on national security issue stuff, simply do not meet. You've got the worst combination of total command and control from the centre, but without any direction of policy other than on his few pet projects. It is just an astonishingly awful picture of just what it's like to currently be in government and just how hopeless Rishi Sunak is politically. And people thought, okay, he doesn't have any real political instincts. He's not a natural politician, but he's a great manager and he's a master of the detail and he's very smart. So, he'll do. But it turns out he's not only is he a useless politician, but he's also a hopeless manager and can't kind of reconcile different interests and takes ages to make decisions. And he's also, people I think assume that he's got this kind of, he's a nice, at the very least, he's a nice guy, an easy guy to deal with,
but he's not,
he's not even a nice guy. He's angry, he's tetchy and kind of snaps at people apparently. And that's actually, it's just kind of really, he's got no redeeming qualities at all, seemingly, judging from, and as Lord Frost points out, he was quoted in the Sunday Times write-up of this poll. One argument that Rishi and his supporters keep making is, yes, the polls are bad, but they're going to get better. Wait until after the budget. Wait until inflation begins to fall. Wait until, the GDP figures are a little bit better. But none of it seems to be making any kind of impact. The figures are just getting worse and worse and worse. And obviously this brings into focus the prospect of him being replaced before the general election, and the moment of maximum danger seems to be after the May locals, in which he's expected to do very badly, not least because they'll be trying to defend seats that were last fought in, I think, 2021, just after the vaccine rollout, when Boris, who was still relatively popular, got that vaccine boost. So, it was a high watermark in terms of the popularity of the Conservatives. So they're going to lose. They're going to be decimated. They're going to lose hundreds, maybe even thousands of council seats. It's going to be a disaster for Rishi, and, only 53 letters have to go in to provoke a leadership, a vote of no confidence. So it could be, and, people are saying, well, how will Rishi react to a vote of no confidence or a leadership challenge? And even if he wins, will he resign anyway? Or if he wins, will he, rather than risk, another vote of no confidence, immediately go to the polls. How would the palace react if he asked for an election just to try and, because, he's trying to save his own skin? So it's all looking terrible. And one of the interesting footnotes to this huge and seemingly quite accurate, reliable poll is that plenty of people who were being talked about as potential replacements for Rishi might also lose their seats. I mean, I think we knew that Penny Mordaunt's seat isn't safe, but apparently James Cleverly might lose his seat. Jeremy Hunt might lose his seat. Even Rishi apparently isn't safe. Like he's got
less than 2.5 percentage points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which means that he may even lose his seat. And you can understand now why GB News hired Boris. They've hired Boris to anchor their election night coverage. And it's just going to... And Boris will just have an absolute... I mean, it'll be like... he'll be talking about all these kind of really prominent... lots of people who kind of conspired against him losing their seats. And it'll all be kind of, what a terrible mistake the Tory party made to get rid of me. They're now reaping the whirlwind from their stupid plotting
with loads of classical quotes thrown in. It'll be like Homer. It'll be just riffing on it. Yeah, that would be amazing if we do that.
I told him this would happen. I told him. Yeah,
it'd be a great moment for Boris. But they could bring Boris back and do a lot better. And there are people saying they'll do this. And by the way, Rishi on Radio Tease today was asked when the general election will be, and just started laughing maniacally. And they were like, "Why are you laughing?" He's like, "Well, because we wouldn't, of course, do it like this." And he just sort of started laughing crazily. It sounded awful. But so Nima Parvini's written a very interesting piece about this on his Substack, and he says that he still thinks they'll replace Rishi, but let's say they don't. He's talking about what an obliteration it will be, and he's called this piece 0 seats, the Labour 600. So it's kind of like the 300, and he's saying 600 Labour seats, 0 Tories. I know it's like 650 total, but anyway, he's saying 600. And he's saying this is actually a great outcome for people who don't like either party, because it destroys the whole illusion of democracy. And he actually says Blair covered this in his book in 1997. In a journey, writing about his 1997 win. Apparently Blair said, pretty soon the scale of the victory became clear. This was not a win, it was a landslide. After about 2 hours, for a time I actually became worried. The moving line at the bottom was showing over 100 Labour seats. The Tories had just 6. I began to think I'd done something unconstitutional. I'd meant to defeat the Tories and do so handsomely, but what if we had wiped them out? So he starts to worry that you're losing the illusion of the adversarial system and the two-party system. And that the whole thing, if Labour just got such a landslide, that it kind of loses, especially if it's because no one shows up to vote for Tories. So I saw a little graph, a little chart that shows in sort of by little pictures of little people where the people are going from the Tories. Most of them are going to Reform or to no one. They're not really going to, some hardly any a few going to Labour, hardly anyone anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So imagine hardly anyone shows up to vote for Tories as a protest. Labour just get this ridiculous majority. Would it kind of... One, Labour can't blame anyone for anything they do anymore, which is a key point. Mm-hmm. So they can't say, it's the Tories. It's like, it's you, Starmer, and Jess Phillips and all these useless people. So you can't blame anyone. The low turnout makes the whole thing questionable. And the ridiculous majority shatters the illusion of a two-party system. What about this idea?
Yeah, so we would effectively become a one-party state because Labour's victory would be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there would be no real official opposition.
Yeah,
and that would be. I think it certainly would be bad for the Labour government if there was no official opposition and the Conservatives were completely wiped out. I mean, I think at that point, obviously the vacuum would be filled by Labour opposition. So there would be talk of breakaway groups from the Labour Party, and they would be jockeying for the kind of status of becoming the official opposition if they could muster enough seats. If say 100 MPs, let's say they actually did win a majority of, I don't know, let's say they won 450 seats, then you could imagine a breakaway group of kind of pro-Palestinian Labour MPs in kind of Muslim constituencies forming a kind of alternative Labour Party, the Islamic Labour Party, and if there were more than 100 of them, they would outnumber the kind of 98 Conservatives and maybe could then stake a claim to becoming the official opposition.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, Parvini suggests that Owen Jones type, if genuine leftists, Corbyn supporters, Owen Jones types, become so disillusioned they too no longer believe in liberal democracy. That would be a win. If establishment right types, the backbone of any system and any regime, check out from the system completely, that would be a win. He just talks about how this sort of shatters the whole illusion and is the reset that we need, essentially.
But it's what does he imagine will happen? That there'll be some kind of bloody revolution.
Well, I wouldn't like to say on that bit, but he says he just says Blair's nightmare is my dream. He just wants to. I think he's one of these guys who wants to sort of reset the whole thing. The whole thing's broken. Let's just let's let the people notice that it's broken, because it is broken. The vast numbers of people are not represented in the country, not allowed into politics, and this would kind of just highlight that and make it impossible to ignore.
Well, I think. I don't think it's likely that Labour are going to do that well. But I suppose it's possible, but I think probably improbable that the Tories will get less than 100 seats. But I think in that scenario, if the Conservative Party is completely decimated, the Parliamentary Conservative Party, then that creates an opportunity for a new party to emerge on the right. And I think it's likely to be the kind of party that Dominic Cummings has been talking about.
The startup party.
Yeah, something like that. Something with a kind of technocratic, right of centre agenda, quite radical when it comes to public service reform, ditch net zero, no truck with woke. But it can't. I don't think it's likely to be reform, even if Nigel Farage ends up coming back as the leader of reform. Partly because there's no kind of elite buy-in to reform. They're still just an insurgent populist party. Whereas you can imagine Cummings pulling together various disaffected, disillusioned members of the kind of conservative elite and bringing them into his party, and that would give them a kind of electoral credibility, which I think Reform currently don't have.
Well, you know more about it than me. I don't personally think it's that likely that Cummings' idea gets anywhere, because I think he's now seen as too wild and out there.
It might not be Cummings that led it. It could be just, he could create the blueprint.
Right. He did all those testimonies. I'd like to see it, though. Cummings had a brilliant post about this, about the kind of complete breakdown of the Tories. I thought I had... Here we go. Oh, no, that's the trans one. Sorry, I thought I had it. But he had a good tweet about the complete breakdown of the Tories, but I've lost it anyway. I might find it in a minute. On reform, did you see that they started to... Oh, here we go. I've actually found the Cummings tweet. He was talking about the Matthew Paris piece, which we might get on later. And he said, on brand that a pundit bang in the heart of Tory establishment now campaigns to kill old people to save money. It's a logical development for the rancid party. Anti-growth, higher taxes, let out the worst criminals, surrender to a few dinghies, vandalise critical capabilities, encourage MOD corruption, cheer on the trans child abuse madness, collapse emergency health system. Then when you're about to be destroyed by voters, tell them the old must be killed to save taxes for the Tory rentiers. Hashtag close the Tories, hashtag the startup party 2025. So that's what reminded me of that. And it's a pretty scathing assessment, a pretty accurate assessment.
Well, but Matthew Paris is not a spokesperson for the Conservative Party. He's an ex-Conservative MP.
No, but then the jumping off point, wasn't it a good critique of the Tories nonetheless?
Right. Yeah, no, pretty good. I mean, I suppose it might be naively optimistic to think that if Starmer wins such a thunderous majority that the Conservative Party are kind of ushered off the political stage, creating a vacuum on the right to be filled by the Startup Party or something similar. It could easily be that, Starmer does well enough and there's so much disarray on the other side of the aisle with lots of different parties kind of jockeying to replace the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party is certainly not going quietly, that actually it just creates an opportunity for Starmer to win, another 2 terms at successive general elections. I mean, that's normally that's what happened in the 80s. One of the reasons the Conservatives did so well is because there was a split on the left between the SDP and Labour, and you can imagine a kind of history repeating itself, but this time the beneficiaries being the Labour Party, and that seems to me to be a more likely scenario if Starmer wins a massive majority. I mean, you tell me if people. I mean, maybe the disillusioned Conservative voters who sit on their hands or who vote for reform out of protest, in November or whenever it is, do you think they'd be galvanised by a start-up party and might come back to the polling booths to vote for the start-up party? I guess it would partly depend on how poorly Labour does, but it's conceivable that Labour would do just about well enough that they would, win a second term and possibly even a third term. And we could be looking at, decades before anything we would remotely recognise as a kind of attractive political agenda is back in Downing Street.
Yeah, well, if I go off my post that I just wrote late at night, I'm going to go off that, though. In that, it just depends how well Labour, if they do anything to do with economy and services, then they can survive, and it's be like China. We'll have oppression, but we'll have a functioning country. If they can't fix the economy, which seems unlikely, then I say it does go to someone. Maybe a Farage somehow comes in. I don't know quite how, but I don't believe they can do anything either, because I don't really believe anyone can pull back the country. But as to whether they'd vote for Startup Party, they might not if Cummings was involved, because he has just such bad PR amongst the normie voter. You know what I mean? Just they think of his eyesight and Barnard Castle and his weird testimonies. They don't think of his Substack and his interesting writings about Bismarck or something. They're just going to be like, oh, I'm not voting for that. But yeah, maybe if they had the right figurehead. But who would the figurehead of the Startup Party be? Because it can't be Cummings.
Matt Goodwin?
I don't want to diss Matt Goodwin because he just did our other show. But I don't know. Would people vote for Matt Goodwin? Well, no idea. Maybe. No idea.
I don't know. He was something. Watching him kind of speak in public at kind of political meetings. There's something of a kind of young David Owen quality about him. He's incredibly fluent, and he has that ability to kind of sound angry and passionate without losing control. Yeah, that's the second part you might struggle with.
Okay, without losing control.
And he's not a professional politician, so who knows? But you can imagine someone emerging to lead the Startup Party who would be kind of more credible than any of the current kind of someone with
as long as it's not
some real political talent.
As long as it's not Constantine, I don't mind. I mean, I personally think I could do it. The only problem is they'd find everything I've ever said, and they wouldn't have to look very far.